Hello, today I'll be doing a video on the game Kingmaker. Now this came out in 2023, but I think the original Kingmaker came out in the late 1970s or something. This is a re-implementation of it. It actually has several versions of Kingmaker included in it. It's got Kingmaker Classic, which I'm assuming is based on the original game from the 70s. It's got Kingmaker Classic Extended Edition, which I guess has rules and modules that were added to Kingmaker over the years, and there's also variants and optional rules included in that. But it also, and it has a solo mode based on classic Kingmaker as well. But I've only played, it comes with Kingmaker 2, which is the re-implemented kind of streamlined edition of Kingmaker, Kingmaker the Second, and that is the version that I played solo to learn the rules, and that's the version of the game that I'm going to go over how to set up and play here today. So, if you want to play the classic Kingmaker or one of the versions thereof, that is included in here. But again, this video won't be going over those rules. I haven't played that version. I don't know all the differences in it. I believe the Kingmaker 2 streamlined the movement and some other rules just to make the game quicker and easier to play. So anyway, let's get started with how to set up and play Kingmaker the Second. Alright, first thing you'll do is place the game board in the center of the play area. Now this is a double-sided board, so for the Kingmaker the Second you'll use this side, but for Kingmaker Classic Edition you'll use the other side of the board. Alright, next you find your royal pieces. You've got your Lancastrian with the red rose and your Yorkist with the white rose. And the Lancastrian will have Henry VI, Edward of Westminster, and Margaret of Anjou. And the Yorkist will have Richard, Duke of York, Edward, Earl of March, George, Duke of Clarence, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester. And if I mispronounce, which I'm sure I will, some of these names of these cities and towns and people, you'll just have to bear with me. But anyway, most of these pieces have an uncrowned and a crowned side, so all of them will start on the uncrowned side except for the current king, Henry VI, who only has a crowned side. But all the other pieces will start on the uncrowned side. And you'll put them in the following locations. Henry VI will go here in London. Margaret of Anjou will go in the Royal Castle Kenilworth there. Edward of Westminster will start here in Coventry. Richard, Duke of York, starts in York. Edward, Earl of March, starts here in Harlech. George, Duke of Clarence, starts here in Cardigan. And finally, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, starts over here in France in Calais. Now the rule book has grid coordinates when it's telling you where to put these. So for instance, when it says Henry VI in London, and it gives you the grid coordinates 5B. So you can look down here. 5 is between these two red lines, and go up and you'll see B is between these two lines. So you don't have to search all over the board to try to find these city names when it's telling you that somebody goes in one of these castles or towns or what have you. It gives you the grid coordinates to look for, so it's easy to find. Next you'll get your deck of crown cards. That's the cards with this back. Now I will say one thing I found a little bit difficult with this game was that when you open it, like I said, it's got all these different versions, the classic version, classic extended version, and then versions that have options and variants, and solo version. Well, all these cards, like all the crown cards for all these versions have the same back, so you kind of have to look, the rules tell you which ones, exactly which ones you need, but you have to go through and look and say, okay, do I need, C22 or whatever. Like it'll tell you for Kingmaker 2, you need C01 through C74. And for like the Kingmaker Classic, they'll have CK, and the extended edition will have, I think, like EXT or something. But you have to sort through all these cards and separate them and find out which cards you'll need if you're just using Kingmaker 2. So, I mean, not terrible, but it was a little bit of a pain in the butt to figure out what components I need just for this version of the game. But anyway, that's already all done. So get out your deck of crown cards. Then the rules suggest if it's your first game that you use the preset factions that are on these preset faction cards, and you find the cards depending on the number of players. I'm going to set up for a 3-player game, so I won't need these 2-player cards. I'll just need these ones for 3 players, and then there's also preset factions for 4 and 5 players. I won't be using those. Now, there are rules for randomly creating your factions if you don't want to use the preset factions, but I'm not going to go over those here. I'm going to use the preset factions as suggested in the rules for your first game. So after you've got the preset faction cards for the number of players that you're going to have, and the back of these cards do have a sequence of play, which is handy. Anyway, you'll go ahead and shuffle these up and deal 1 to each player. Alright, so I've dealt these out. This player will have Beaufort's faction, this player will have Courtenay's faction, and this player over here will have Talbot's faction. And then you'll go through your crown cards and find the cards that you need for your faction. So we'll look at Talbot's. So for instance, we need titled noble, Stafford and Talbot, so that's 2 nobles. So I searched through the crown deck and found the titled nobles. Stafford, you can see his name here, and Talbot, you can see his name here. Now you know they're titled noble because they have their title up here, so Stafford is Duke of Buckingham, and Talbot is Earl of Shrewsbury. There are, like a noble like this, like Grey, you'll see they don't have a title like these titled nobles do. Now there are crown cards that can give these untitled nobles titles, and we'll see that later. But, so we've gone and found the 2 titled nobles we need for this faction. Now we need to find the untitled nobles, Berkeley and Howard. Alright, so as you can see, I found Berkeley and Howard, and again, they have no title, just as it said, untitled nobles. Now we'll go through the crown deck and look for the offices, Chancellor of England and Warden of the North Marches. Alright, so I found those. All offices are yellow cards, as seen here. And you'll see down here it says Warden of the Northern Marches, which was one we were looking for, and Chancellor of England, which is another one we're looking for. And I'll talk about what some of these other things are on here in a little bit, but we're just going to finish getting all the cards we need for Talbot's faction. So next, we need a title, the Earl of Worcester. Alright, so here's the title. This is what a title card looks like. It's kind of orange, and again, that's Earl of Worcester or Worcester. I'm not sure exactly how that's pronounced by the British. Alright, so that's the one title card we're looking for. Now next it says we need the Bishop of Durham, so again, we'll look through our crown cards for that. Alright, I found here the Bishop of Durham. The bishop and archbishop cards are kind of brownish, like this one here. Alright, a couple more we need to find. Towns of Lancaster and Shrewsbury. Alright, so the city cards are green, so I found a town of Lancaster and town of Shrewsbury. Again, these are all crown cards that are in the crown deck, and we're just going through and finding the ones required for our faction. And the last cards we need are some mercenary cards, the Burgundian Crossbowmen and Scottish Exiles. Alright, and the mercenary cards are red on the front like this, and here we've got the Burgundian Crossbowmen, and the Scottish Exiles. Alright, so that's all the cards we need to build our faction. Okay, so I've also gone through and found all the appropriate cards for Courtenay's faction, and I found all the appropriate cards for Beaufort's faction. We'll take the remaining crown cards, shuffle them up, which I've already done, and place them here on the crown deck space on the board. Alright, now we need to find cards for our Chancery. That requires us to start turning over cards from the crown deck until we find either 2 offices or 2 titles or a combination thereof, 1 office, 1 title, etc. And then once we find those, any cards that we had turned over, we'll shuffle back into the crown deck. So let's start looking. That is a noble. That's some mercenaries. There's a title, so that'll go face up in the Chancery. And that's a ship, and an archbishop, and a noble, and a town, and an office, Lord of the Isle of Wight. Those will go in the Chancery. Now we'll go ahead and shuffle these back into our crown deck. Alright, I've shuffled those cards back into our crown deck. Now we'll move on to the next step of setup. Alright, now we need to find our victory card, so we need the royal victory card because that is one way to win by royal victory. Another way to win is by prestige victory, so we need to find the card for the number of players, which we are 3 players, so this has 2 players on one side and 5 players on the other. Again, we're 3 players, so we need the prestige victory card for 3 players and the royal victory card. And we place them up here on the victory card space. And we'll talk more about how you win in a little bit. These other victory cards, prestige victory card, can just go back in the deck, in the box. Next we find these 8 cards that say major battle on one side and major siege on the other side, and we just place them on this space on the board. Next we get our royal cards. We have 1 card to match each royal piece that's on the board. So Henry VI, Margaret of Anjou, Edward of Westminster, Richard Duke of York, Edward Earl of March, George Duke of Clarence, and Richard Duke of Gloucester. And we'll put the Lancastrian royal cards here where it says the Lancastrian royal cards go, and we'll put the Yorkist royal cards here where it says the Yorkist royal cards go. There are some player aids. I think there's just 4 of them, so if you're playing with 5 players, maybe 2 people will have to share, but you can pass out these player aids to all the players. Alright, next each player chooses a color and takes the noble pieces, faction markers, and stack marker in their player color, and the faction markers have their color's badge on them. So for Talbot's faction, we're going to have them be the gray pieces. Beaufort's faction will be the blue noble pieces, faction markers, and stacking marker. And Courtenay's faction will be these, I don't know, brownish, dark tannish, I don't know exactly what color that is. But anyway, their noble pieces will be these colors, and their faction markers will be this color. And badge, and this will be their stack marker. Alright, now we'll finish setting up our factions. Remember, we found all the cards in our preset faction card for each of our factions, and now we'll finish setting them up. So again, these are our nobles. They will represent pieces. You'll find the corresponding piece here in your noble pieces. So for instance, Duke of Buckingham will find that he has a shield on his noble piece that looks like that. So that will be our Duke of Buckingham piece. Earl of Shrewsbury, I believe that is his noble piece. Let's find Berkeley. Alright, there is Berkeley's noble piece, and lastly for Talbot's faction we need Howard. And that is Howard's noble piece. Now you'll see these noble pieces have 2 sides. They have this side that kind of shows like a castle or fort looking icon on the back. that they get flipped to that side when they're in a fortified location, like a town or a city, or in one of their castles, or but if they're just in like a regular unfortified town or in an open field next to a town, then they are flipped to the unfortified side. So they're only on that side when they're actually in a town or a castle or so forth. And we'll go over that more in the rules. Some other pieces of information on this card is we see where their starting location is. So Berkeley, we see he starts in Berkeley in 3B, and there's a little icon on the map that kind of shows where it is. So we'll take his token and we'll put that in Berkeley in coordinates 3B. That's here. You see that shield matches his. And because that's his own castle, he'll start in there on the fortified side. And you'll also want to put one of your faction's control markers there. So if you happen to leave that location, then other players know that that is yours, unless, of course, they end up taking it over. But anyway, so we'll mark that with one of his faction markers and put his noble there. All right, Duke of Buckingham, he starts with 2 castles, Stafford in 3C and Leeds in 5B. So he chooses which one of those he wants to start with his noble in. We'll start with Stafford in 3C, since his name is Stafford. So I'll put one of his control markers, and then we'll put him on his fortified side because he's in his own castle there. And though he started in Stafford, he still does own a castle in Leeds 5B, so he'll want to put one of his control markers there. So we find Leeds 5B, here it is, we'll put a control marker there. All right, Talbot, he starts in Blakemere in 3D, and again this kind of shows where it is. But you can look at the coordinates to see where 3D is, and Blakemere is here. So he'll start on his fortified side, and we'll go ahead and put a little faction marker there as well. And finally we have Howard here, who starts in Farnham in 4B, which you can see is kind of down here. So 4B, Farnham there, put a little faction marker, and put him on his fortified side. Alright, so we've got our nobles placed. Now we have other faction cards that we've dealt out. So we have 1 title. Now each noble can only have 1 title. So these 2 nobles start with a title already, Duke of Buckingham and Earl of Shrewsbury, so they can't have another title. But we do have the Earl of Worcester, so it can go to one of these untitled nobles. Again, any noble can only have 1 title, so we decide which one we want to give it to. So maybe we'll just give that to Berkeley. So you just kind of slide it up. It doesn't give him any control of any locations. If it did, it would see it here. So we'll slide it up here. A couple other things I want to mention on these cards. These numbers here are the number of troops that this card gives. So Duke of Buckingham right now comes with 30 troops. Berkeley normally comes with 10 troops, but because now he's the Earl of Worcester, he has another 30 troops. So right now he has 40 troops with him in his location. There's another little number up here. You see this has number 3, this has number 1, this has a 0, and this has a 0. That number represents how many times event cards may call these nobles to locations, or something like that. And we'll talk more about that when we go over events. But so Duke of Buckingham, there's 3 events that could call him. Earl of Shrewsbury, just 1, and no events that will call these 2 nobles. All right, well, we've got 2 offices we can give. You can only give an office to a noble that has a title. So right now we've got 3 titled nobles. We've got Duke of Buckingham, Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, and Berkeley, Earl of Worcester. So any of those 3 can have a title. Now a noble can only ever have, any of those 3 can have an office. A noble can only ever have 1 title, and a noble can only ever have 1 office. So we couldn't give both these offices to one noble. We have to split them up. So we'll give Chancellor of England to Stafford here, and again you'll see that comes with 50 troops. It also gives him control of another castle or town. Let's see, I don't know how to pronounce Carnarvon up in 2D, so we'll get a control marker there. That looks like it's this royal castle, so we'll put one of his control markers there. And this little wax seal icon here means that's worth a prestige point. We'll set those in a minute and talk about that here in a little bit. But all titles give a prestige point. So anyway, we're giving Chancellor of England to the Duke of Buckingham. I think we'll give Warden of the Northern Marches to Earl of Shrewsbury. Let's look at this one. It's going to give control of 2 locations, Berwick 3G and Bamberg 4G. So those are both up here, Berwick and Bamberg. And another thing we'll look at here, this is worth 50 troops, but it shows if there's this noble that we're giving it to, which is Earl of Shrewsbury, if he is up in the north of the River Tees, which is this section up here, you'll see that says Tees. So if he's in a battle in any of this section, then it comes with 100 extra troops there. So if he was in a battle in that colored section, he would have 150 troops from this card. But in any other place, he just has 50. So we will slide that under his card. All right, let's see what other cards we have here. We've got the Bishop of Durham. Now, any noble can have 1 bishop or archbishop with them. And we'll see the Bishop of Durham, he's got these parentheses around his number of troops. So as you can see, he has no permanent force. So normally he doesn't provide any troops, but he does provide 30 troops if the battle is taking place north of the River Trent. And we'll see it's that section here, and that's marked by this region. You'll see it says Trent right there. So if it takes place up here in this area, then Bishop of Durham will grant 30 troops. And actually it looks like the River Trent is this area right here. So if the battle takes place in any of this upper area right here, then those 30 extra troops are granted. See, it says north of River Trent here, north of River Trent. So it's this whole section here. Since Talbot is granted extra troops when he's fighting up in that area anyway, maybe we'll give him the Bishop of Durham and maybe keep him up in that area of the map where he'll be granted those extra troops. Okay, we still have some mercenaries in some towns. Now, just to reiterate, any noble can only have 1 title, so if it's a noble that has a title printed on them, they can't be granted a title card. If it's an untitled noble, they can be granted a title card. And then any noble with a title can have an office, so we've assigned our office. Any noble can have 1 bishop or archbishop, and then any noble can have any number of mercenaries and towns. And you'll see that the mercenaries grant troops, and towns not only give you control of a town, like this one. If you have this one assigned to your noble, he'll get control of Lancaster. And if you have this one assigned to a noble, he'll get control of Shrewsbury, and they give some extra troops. So since Talbot is Earl of Shrewsbury, I think I'm going to give him the town of Shrewsbury. And so we'll put a control marker on 3D, which is where Shrewsbury is. That is here. Alright, we have a few more cards to award. Since Howard doesn't have anything yet, I'm going to give him Town of Lancaster. That gives him Lancaster, which is in 3E. So we'll put one of our control markers there on Lancaster since Howard has that. And then we got a couple of Scottish exile. I mean, we have a Burgundian crossbowman and a Scottish exile. Let's give Howard these Burgundian crossbowmen, and we'll give Duke of Buckingham these Scottish exiles. All right, we've now assigned all our faction cards to our different nobles. So, for example, Stafford here in this location, he's in the Castle Stafford. He has 100 troops with him. So 50 plus 30 is 80, plus 20 is 100. So wherever he is currently, he'll have 100 troops. Talbot, depending on where he is, could have more troops right now because his location is down here south of the River Trent. He just has 30, his default of 30, his default of 50 for the Warden of the Northern Marches. So he'll only have those 50 unless he's fighting up here when he'll get the extra 100. Nothing from Bishop and Durham unless he's in a battle above River Trent. And 10 from Shrewsbury. So he has 30 plus 50, that's 80, plus 10 is 90, but he could have more if he moved up here and was battling up here. And of course, Berkeley just has 40, and Howard just has 50. All right, so that's our setup for Talbot's faction. So now we can just turn this over to the sequence and play. I'm going to go ahead and set up the other two factions, and I'll be back. I wanted to show something when I'm setting up the blue faction here, Beaufort's faction. He's getting the office of Admiral of England. So there's something here that we hadn't seen when setting up Talbot's faction. He actually gets some ships, La Marguerite of Lynn and Le Christopher of Southampton. So these are the ship markers that go with that. You can see Le Christopher of Southampton and La Marguerite of Lynn. So they have a in port side that has the little anchor, and then when they're at sea they get flipped over. But these will go in the locations shown there. So Le Christopher will go in Southampton for A in port there. So that's Corfe. Here's Southampton, and you can see it's got a little anchor there, so this little estuary goes up. So Le Christopher will start there. And Lynn is up here. You'll see the little anchor. That means there's a little port there. So La Marguerite will start up there, and Lynn in the little port there. All right, that was just something that I hadn't shown in the other setup, so I wanted to show that. All right, so I finished setting up Courtenay's faction with their 4 nobles as seen here, and Beaufort's faction with their 4 nobles as seen here. And we've got their noble pieces and faction control markers placed on the board. There are 4 city cards, York, London, Bristol, and Norwich. And those go here where it says city cards. Now, if one of your crown cards that you got when setting up your faction gave you control of one of those cards, then you would take the associated card and put your faction control marker on the associated city. All right, now we'll put one of our faction markers on the prestige point, denoting how much prestige we have at the start of the game. I said it's these wax seal symbols here, so we have one for Chancellor of England, one for Warden of the Northern Marches, so 2 prestige on the prestige track. Our other factions also started with 2 prestige as shown here, so all of them will start with 2 prestige on the prestige track. Alright, almost done. We need to take our event deck, which is the deck with this back. We'll look through there and find the free move card, one for each player. Alright, this is what a free move card looks like. I've given one to Talbot, the Talbot player, given one up here to the Courtenay player, Courtenay faction player, and one here to the Beaufort faction player. Next we'll look through the event deck and find the 4 Clamor for Parliament cards, and we'll set them aside. Alright, these are the Clamor for Parliament cards. I found the 4 of them, set them aside for now. Alright, next we'll shuffle up the event deck, which I've already done, and then we'll remove a number of cards in the event deck depending on the number of players. In a 3-player game, you'll remove 37 cards. So we'll set those 37 cards aside. They'll only be used if the event deck ends up running out before the game ends. So we're left with our remaining event cards. We'll then split the remaining event cards into equal stacks, and that depends on the number of players. So it'll be 4 equal stacks, but in a 3-player game it will be 4 equal stacks of 12 cards. So I've got my 4 equal stacks of 12 cards, and then I'm going to shuffle 1 Clamor for Parliament card into each of these stacks of cards. So let me get that done. Alright, once you've got the Clamor for Parliament card shuffled 1 into each deck, you'll take 2 stacks, put them on top of each other. Then you'll take your Prestige Victory tile, place that on top of that stack, then take the other 2 stacks, place them on top of your Prestige Victory tile, and then place the whole event deck here at the top of the board where it says event deck. And we're pretty much complete with setup. The last thing to do is assign the start player token, and if you're using the preset factions, you'll see that Talbot's faction has this asterisk that says the Talbot faction takes the start player marker, so Talbot would be the start player. If you're not using the preset faction cards, then it's start players, the player who has the highest ranking archbishop or bishop in their faction. And you can look in the rule book to see the order of those. I think it's the Archbishop of Canterbury, then York, and then Bishop of Durham, which is what the Earl of Shrewsbury has. And then after that it is Bishop of Carlisle, then Lincoln, which this player has, and this player has Carlisle. And then I think the last one is Norwich. But since he has Durham, which is higher than Lincoln and Carlisle, he is the start player. And that's it. We're finally all set up and ready to learn how to play. Alright, so how do we play? Well, the game is played in rounds. Each round is made up of each player taking 1 turn, starting with the start player and going in clockwise order. A player's turn is made up of several phases. You have the event phase, the movement phase, combat phase. Of course, there may not be a combat phase every round or for each player, for every player. Then you have a parliament phase, which does not occur very often. You have a coronation phase, which will not occur very often, and then an end of turn phase. So let's talk about each of those phases, starting with the event phase. So, for instance, the start player would take the first turn of the game, so they need to draw an event card. So when you draw an event card for the event, you look at the top left portion over here. The black portion over here is used in combat. The top left portion is the event portion. And for this one, we would just read what it says. Chancellor may summon Parliament. When drawn, give to the faction with the Chancellor of England. If not in play, then you discard this. Now it just so happens we do have the Chancellor of England here, Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham. So if anybody drew this event, they would give this card to him if he's in play, and then that allows him a chance to summon Parliament, and we'll talk about more about how that can happen later. But that's one possible event. Let's look at some other possible events. Another type of event is a peasant revolt, and what this does is ends up calling nobles with titles or noble by name to certain locations. So, for instance, when this event comes out, then if anybody is the Earl of Essex, they would have to go to Colchester in 6B. I don't think we have any Earl of Essex right now, so that person wouldn't have to go. But if the noble De Vere was in play, he would have to go to Hedingham. And if the Marshal of England, that is, I think, an office, if the Marshal of England is in play, then he would have to go to Malden in 5B. So when one of your nobles gets called, you just pick it up and move it to whatever the location you're told to go, no matter where it is on the map. So that can end up, foiling your plans if you're building up a force to maybe attack somebody, and all of a sudden, one of your powerful nobles gets called away because of an event. That can be an issue. All right, another type of event you might get is plague. So plague hits these three towns or cities. So, and again, it gives you the coordinates where they are. For instance, Nottingham here. So if you have nobles or a royal piece in a town or city that has the plague, then the royal piece is killed and your noble is killed. Now, if you happen to have two nobles, if a single player has two nobles in a town that gets the plague, then they don't lose both nobles, but they have to lose the noble that's got the highest troop strength. But if several players have a noble in there, which that would only happen if they had an alliance, they would, each lose a noble. And again, if you have a royal piece there, it would be killed as well. So staying in cities and towns that have not previously had a plague can be dangerous. Now, once this event card has come out with the plague for these towns, then they will not get hit with plague in a future event. So remembering which towns or cities have already been hit with the plague can help you, because they're safe to be in, whereas being inside any other city or town could possibly hit you with plague if that card is drawn. If your noble is just outside in the open field in a area near the town that gets the plague, they're not affected. They have to actually be in the town or city to be affected by the plague. Another type of event might be a raid, but it works kind of like the peasant revolt, where certain nobles with certain titles or just a noble by name may get called away to the location named on the card. All right, another type of event card that may come up is the Clamor for Parliament. When you draw one of these, you just place it face up here in the Clamor for Parliament space. And those can be used to call a parliament. We'll talk more about that later, but that's just one type of event card that may come up. Another type of event that may come up is storms at sea, and these are all the same. So any ships that are out at sea have to take refuge at the nearest port. So if you had a ship that was out, at sea here, it would have to go to the nearest port, which for this one would be here at Pevensey. But any ships that are at sea have to go to the nearest port when one of these cards are drawn. You may draw a free move event card, in which you just keep that, and you can use that as a free move, and we'll talk about movement here in a little bit. One of the other types of events is embassy, which actually moves whoever the king is. So this one moves the king to the location stated there, Rye. If there are two kings or no king, then you would just ignore this and discard it. And I think the last type of event card that might come up is Mercenaries Go Home, which may send the mercenaries that a certain noble has home. So in this case, any noble that has Flemish crossbowmen or Flemish handgunners would lose them. They would get discarded. So for instance, Earl of the Courtenay, Earl of Devonshire here does have Flemish crossbowmen, so he would have to discard those to the crown card discard pile. Now just a couple of things to mention, like the Peasant Revolt card and some of those other event cards that I showed that call a noble away to a certain location. And I said that noble has to go to that location. If a noble is on one of the islands, like Isle of Man, Anglesey, Isle of Wight, or if they're over in Calais, then they do not get called away to the location that event card. Or if they're under siege, which we haven't talked about combat yet, then they can't be called to that location. But any other circumstance, if they're on the mainland, then they will be called away. And the embassy card that calls the king, whichever noble, if a noble has control of the king, then that noble would go with the noble piece, the king that's called to whatever location the embassy sent him. All right, so that pretty much covers most of the event cards. So that covers the event phase. A player will draw an event card. Whatever event card that is gets resolved. And then the player moves on to their movement phase. Alright, during a player's movement phase, they can move none, any, or all of their nobles. And the options you have for moving is either regional movement, in which you can move, for instance, if we were, our player over here, and say he wants to move Howard, he can use regional movement to Howard to any other area in this region. So the region is the blue or the purple bordered area. That's one region. And all the little white boxes inside the region are areas. So with regional movement, he can move his piece unhindered by any enemy pieces or anything to any other area in this region. So he could move, here or here or here, here. Now you can't move into a neutral or enemy location. For instance, London here, it's not friendly to you. It doesn't have one of your control markers in it, so you can't move into London. You can move into this area and be in the open field near London, or this Pleshy castle. You couldn't move into it because it's neutral, but you could move into the open field in that area. The little unfortified towns here don't really have any effect on movement, or they can't be taken over by siege or anything. They're more or less just to kind of show different towns in the area. But anyway, so with regional movement, you can move to any of the areas within the region you're in, or any of the areas in a region adjacent to the region you're in. So for instance, he could move Howard to any of the areas in this region, any of the areas in this region, any of the areas in this region, or any of the areas in this region, or any of the areas in this region. So, he could move, over here to Bath, but again, he'd be in the open field, or he could move all the way over here to Taunton and be in the open field. He could even move here to where the blue player, Beaufort, has his castle, but he couldn't move into Beaufort's castle. He would just have to stay in the open field near it. He couldn't move into this royal castle of Windsor because it's neutral. He would have to just move into the open field near it. Now you can move into all right, so if he was here in Farnham, he could, because this is an adjacent region. He could move into Leeds because his faction controls that castle, so he could actually move directly into Leeds. Though he couldn't move into Canterbury, he would have to be in the open field next to it because it's neutral. His faction does not control it. Now, if you have an ally, we'll talk more about allies later, but if you're allied with a player, you can move into allied controlled towns or cities. All right, another type of movement you can use instead of regional movement is road movement. So if you're in an area that contains a piece of road, you can move along that road through any neutral areas or neutral or friendly or allied towns or fortifications as far as the road goes. So, he could go along this road. He could pass through London. He couldn't stop in London. He could pass through London all the way up to here to Norwich. Now, he couldn't stop in Norwich because it's neutral, but he could be in the open field there in Norwich. If he wanted to come along this way, he could come all the way up along this road, all the way to his own castle of Shrewsbury, or going up to Chester and stop in the open field there. However, if an enemy controlled castle or town or city, fortification of some sort, blocks is covering the road you want to go through. So for instance, if he wanted to leave here and go this way, well, Beaufort's faction controls this castle that blocks the road, so he could not move through it unless he got Beaufort's permission. And so he would have to ask that player, "Hey, can I pass through your castle here at Wallingford?" And if he agreed, then he could try to move on. But then we've got Courtenay's faction here in Oxford, which blocks the road, so he would have to get his permission as well. And they do not have to give you permission, or they could try to make some deal, saying, okay, well, next time I want to pass through one of your fortifications that's blocking a road, you have to let me. And that may be honored or not honored. But anyway, so you can move along a road as far as possible unless it would pass through an enemy-controlled town, city, or castle, or some fortification that the road passes through. And then you would have to stop. Like if you tried to go up this way and the blue player said, "No, I won't let you through," well, then you would have to stop in the field in that area. And then on your next turn, then you could use regional movement to go ahead and move past it. So they can't block you with regional movement, but they can block you with road movement. All right, hopefully that makes sense. And the next and last possible way to move is sea movement. All right, sea movement I think we've already talked a little about. So for instance, if you wanted to move this ship, it's in this port of Southampton. It costs 1 to move out of it into the adjacent sea zone, and it can move up to 5, so then it could move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and be in this sea zone. If you want to go into a port, if he left Southampton and he went 1, 2, and he wanted to go into Weymouth, that would be, his third movement to go into Weymouth, and then flip back, because he's then in a port, flip back to the side that has the icon with the anchor on it. Now, empty ships can move out of and into any port, whether it's an unfortified port like Weymouth or a fortified port like Exeter. They can move into and out of those as long as they're empty. For a ship with passengers, it's different. You can only board, embark on a ship and disembark on a ship from a friendly or unfortified location. So, for instance, if Beaufort here, if this was his ship docked here, and he wanted to move using ship movement, well, first he previously this turn couldn't have moved using area or road movement. You can only use one type of movement per turn. So if he hadn't previously this turn used road movement or area movement, then he can do ship movement, and he could, because this is a friendly port. He owns this castle here. He could embark on this ship, which can hold up to 200 troop strength, and he's only got 100 troop strength. So he could get on his ship, and then he could, move one out of port, then 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now there's not he's out of movement, but say on the next turn he wanted to disembark in Swansea on his next movement phase. On his next turn he could move 1 and then 2 into Swansea, and then he would automatically be disembarked into his friendly fortified location there. Now, that would have used his sea movement, so he wouldn't then also be able to do area or road movement that turn. And of course, this would be docked there. For another example, if he left here, 1 into the sea, 2 here, he could not move into Exeter because it's not a friendly or unfortified location. That Exeter owns that port, and that's a neutral. So the only way he could enter that location is if he had enough troop strength, which would to siege Exeter, which that's a garrison, so he would need to have at least 200 troops to enter that port, which he doesn't. He's only got 100. Now down here, because wherever the anchor is, whatever the nearest icon next to it is, so this one's icon for an unfortified town. So an unfortified town controls Dartmouth, so he could move into Dartmouth. Though if he moved here, he would not be able to move into Plymouth because that belongs to another faction. All right, so those are your 3 types of movement: regional movement, road movement, and sea movement. All right, so in a player's movement phase, they can move any or all their troops to whichever areas they want to move to. And then once they've completed their movement, well, we didn't talk about a free move. So, each player got 1 free move card at the beginning of the game during setup. You can use a free move card in your movement phase to move a noble. Even though you've already moved them once, you can play a free move card to move one of your nobles a second time. So maybe you moved your noble by regional movement to get it near a port, and then you could use your free move card to then move that same noble by ship. But then that's discarded, and you'd have to wait till you draw another event card that has a free move for you to have another one in the future. Alright, so after a player's movement phase, we move on to the combat phase. Now, as I mentioned, there may not be a combat phase in every round. A noble may not have moved his pieces, his nobles, into a place where they will have a combat. So that may be a phase that's skipped, but we'll talk about how it works if it's not skipped. Now, I will mention that in the first round of the game, a noble cannot attack another noble's faction. So that is just a limitation for the first round of the game. But going forward, starting the second round of the game, nobles can attack other nobles. So anyway, there's 2 types of combat. There are sieges, where a noble may be sieging a enemy or neutral town, city, or fortification, castle, so forth. And then there's combat between nobles in the open field. So let's talk about sieges first. So you can siege a neutral fortified location, such as a town or a royal castle or another castle from a different faction, or you can siege an enemy's fortification, for instance, like Oxford here. And if we look at the little legend down here, we'll see that a town with no other nobles in it has a garrison of 200 troops. So, for instance, if this player, the Talbot faction, the Gray faction, had on their turn moved here into Oxford, with this player alone, that's Berkeley. They only have 40 troops, and Oxford, even though there's no other noble in there, has a garrison of 200. So they would not be able to siege Oxford. You have to have at least equal to the garrison, the number of troop as the garrison, and if there is a defending noble in there, then it would be the garrison's number, of 200 plus whatever total of the noble or nobles that are in there, the total of their troops. You would have to have at least that number of troops in order to siege it. So, to give another example, let's say, we've got Talbot here. Maybe on his turn he moved up here into Chester, and Stafford also moved up here to where Chester is. And between the two of them, they do have, again, a town has a garrison of 200, so if they wanted to siege this town, they would have to have at least 200 troops between them. Well, it looks like unfortunately they still wouldn't have enough, because he's got Stafford has 100, but Talbot doesn't get those Bishop of Durham troops unless he's attacking, further up north. So he's only got 80, 90, so he's 10 short. But we'll say maybe, for example, that Berkeley had taken road movement all the way up to Chester, so he's there too. Now this gives me an example where we could use our stacking marker. So, it gets kind of messy when you have several of your nobles markers up in there. So you can put your stacking marker in there and then move your nobles into one of these stacking zones to show that, okay, wherever your stacking marker is, these are the nobles that are there. Now, again, you don't have to do that, but it just kind of makes it a little bit cleaner if that's what you want to do. And when moving, if you're going to move all those nobles together during your movement phase, you can just move that stacking marker, and that means all three of those nobles move to that location. All right, but let's get back to our combat. So we have these three nobles, Stafford, Talbot, and Berkeley, and now we do have at least 200 troops, which is how many the town has a garrison of 200. We had 190 from Stafford and Talbot, and we brought Howard up there, and he has another 50. So we have over the 200. So we can successfully siege that town. Because there's no other nobles in there, then it's just simply a matter of drawing an event card and looking at the black section here. The only thing that could make us fail this siege, because we had a number of troops equal to or greater than the defending garrison, the only thing that could make us fail this siege is bad weather delays attack. If you get bad weather delays attack, then the siege does not happen. And you'll have to wait until your next turn in order to try to siege that location again if that's what you want to do. The fortified location becomes besieged, so you put a besieged marker on there. Now when you're attacking a neutral fortified location like that, a besieged marker doesn't really have too many consequences. However, if there had been if this had been an enemy fortified location and we were attacking it, and we drew a bad weather delays attack and it becomes besieged and you put the besieged marker in there, then the nobles that are besieged in there cannot move out of there. They can't be called away. They can't add any cards. We haven't talked about adding cards to your nobles yet. We'll get to that in a little bit, but they wouldn't be allowed to add any cards to nobles that they have in the besieged location. Other nobles can't come in and move into a besieged location and so forth. So, but in this case, when it's an unfortified location that you're attacking, then if it becomes besieged, there's really not too much consequence to that. Although if it was on a road where people might want to pass through, you can't pass through a location that's besieged. All right, but that's what happens if a bad weather delays attack. If we hadn't pulled that and instead maybe we had pulled this result, so anything other than bad weather delays attack, when you're sieging a location, then the siege is successful. But you do have to look at this section, killed. If any of the nobles that are participating in the siege are named here, then they are killed. So in this case, it's Pole and Fitzalan. Well, we had Stafford, Talbot, and Howard involved in this, so they're not named there, so none of them are killed. If two of your nobles that were participating were both named there, then you wouldn't have to have them both killed. You would just kill the one with the highest troop strength. But no matter who was killed there, as long as you had at least one noble still alive after that is resolved, then the siege would be successful and you would be able to take that town. And then you could put one of your factions control markers on there, and you would then control that town. Now, if there had been enemy nobles in there, then you would capture those nobles and you could execute them or ransom them back. We'll talk about that a little bit later, about what happens when a noble is executed or when a noble dies. We'll get into the details about that here in a little bit. And sieging a fortified location that has any enemy nobles in it works similarly, though the total number of troops you have doesn't have to just equal the garrison. It has to equal the garrison plus the number of enemy troops in there. So if, for instance, Fitzalan had been in here, Earl of Arundel, he had been in there, and this faction wanted to attack this fortified location of Chester. Well, they would have to have not only the 200 troops that the garrison provides, but they would have to also have enough to equal Fitzalan's troops, which is 80, 90. So they would have to have at least 290 troops to move in there. If they have 290 or more, then they could siege that location and draw a card, and as long as it wasn't bad weather delays attack, then they would be successful. But again, they would have to check if any of the nobles on either side of the combat were named in the killed section. Like if this card was drawn, well, Fitzalan would be killed and he would have to be removed, and we'll talk about what happens with a killed noble here in a little bit. Now, if I was unclear, you don't have to attack. Like these nobles could move into this open field here, and during the combat phase, they don't have to attack that fortified location. They could just sit there peacefully. So combat is always optional. If it's your turn and you're in a location with enemy nobles or with an enemy or neutral fortification, you don't have to attack it. That's optional. It's just if you want to attack it, then of course if it's a fortified location, then you're going to siege attack it, and you have to have a total number of troops equal to the garrison there. Now, cities, like London, have a larger garrison. They've got 300, and then plus if there was an enemy noble that controlled that, then plus their total number of troops. Royal castles like this, they have a garrison of 200. Regular noble castles like this, they just have a garrison of 100. Again, but if a noble's in there, then it's also the total of their troops as well. Unfortified towns, again, they don't have any garrison. You don't take those over in any way. There are a few open towns, like Hereford, Cardigan. Those are neutral. Nobody can ever gain control of those. And you can move into them for free as long as there's not an enemy noble in there. If there is an enemy noble in there and you decide to siege it, then it does get the garrison of 200 troops plus whatever number of troops the noble that's in there has. But once that noble leaves there, he can't put a control marker there. So the ones with flags are always open towns, and you can always move into them as long as there's not an enemy noble in there already. One other thing I should mention about these towns, besides the garrison, which is the number of troops defending on it, you'll see it says protect, like a town protect 400, a castle protect 300, city protect infinity, so as many. So that's the number of troops that can actually be in that fortified location. So if you sieged a town and you had, in your attacking force, you had 450 troops or something, well, when you win that siege, you couldn't move 450 troops in there because a town can only hold 400. So you'd have to leave some noble with at least 50 troops out in the open field next to the town, because it can only hold 400 troops, whereas a city can hold any number of troops, and a royal castle or a noble's castle can only hold 300 troops. So that pretty much covers sieges. I do want to show there are these major siege cards. If you ever win a siege where at least one noble on each side of the combat had an office, so the attacker had a noble that had at least one office holder, and the defender of the fortified location had a noble. Then the winner, if you win that siege, you take one of these major siege cards. You have to put it with one of the nobles that participated in the attack, and you'll see that gives you a prestige point. All right, so let's talk about the other type of combat, which is a combat between nobles in an open field. So I'll just say, for example, Clifford and Arundel were here in this area, and on his turn, Talbot and Stafford decide, well, they couldn't get there from here because that would be two regional moves. Well, let's say they were here, and then they decided on their turn that they were going to move in here. Now, again, they don't have to attack opposing nobles there, but if they do decide that they're going to initiate combat, then they say in their combat phase, okay, we're going to attack these nobles. Now, the Talbot faction could say, well, I'm just going to have Stafford attack, and Talbot is not going to participate in the combat, and so then he wouldn't be, although the defending nobles, all the defending nobles of one faction would participate. But you could say one of your nobles is not participating, but then you probably wouldn't have enough in this case. So in this case, they're going to say, both their nobles are going to attack, and of course the defender, all their nobles will defend. So in this case, you add up the number of troops on both sides. So Stafford and Talbot together, we know they just have 190 troops. And if we look at Clifford, he does, because the battle is taking place north of the River Trent, he does get those 30 troops. So he gets 30, 40. He's got 50, and Fitzalan has 80, 90. So 140 troops for those two against 190 for these two. All right, so then you look at your player aid, and there's a chart in there, this table of odds, and what you'll do is look for the weaker side's troop strength, which we know is 140, which is right here, and then you go across and look for the higher strength from the side with the higher strength. We know they're 190. Well, the past 180, but it's less than 210, so we would stop at 180. And then we look at the top of that, and we see the odds are 5-4. So not really good odds, but he says he wants to go forward with it anyway. Now, if you're the weaker side and you're attacking, there's no possible way that you can win the battle. You can go ahead and proceed with it anyway and hope that the event card that's drawn, even though you're not going to lose the battle, but maybe you could hope the event card that's drawn is going to, kill off one of the nobles participating in the battle. But even if that happens, you don't win the battle. You always have to have a greater number of troops in order to have a chance of winning the battle. But in this case, we've looked, our odds are 5-4, so now we draw an event card. So we draw this one, and if your odds are listed here, then you're victorious. In this case, our odds are not listed here, so we don't win the battle. The Talbot and Stafford do not win the battle, but Fitzalan, because he's listed on the killed, Fitzalan would be killed and removed. If this faction had won the battle, then they would capture those nobles, and then they have the opportunity to either ransom them back to that faction's player, we'll talk about what that involves here in a minute, or they could just execute them, and both those nobles would be killed. In this case, because they lost the battle, then just nothing happens, other than, of course, Fitzalan was killed because of the result that we drew. And that just kind of represents that that noble in the, mix of battle, the heat of the battle, that noble happened to be killed by, an arrow or, a spear through the through the torso or something. He just happened to be killed. So that's what that result is. So even though the battle was not lost by their side, Fitzalan was still killed. Now the side you're attacking, if you don't draw the odds that you needed to win, the side that you're attacking doesn't mean that they win. It just means the battle is indecisive and there is no winner. So you have to be the attacker and draw the appropriate odds that you needed to win in order to win the battle. The other side doesn't automatically win if you didn't win. Now there is a step that I left out of here, and it's both for a battle like this between nobles and when you're sieging a fortified location that does have a nobles in it, and that is before you draw the card to see the results, the opponent first has an opportunity to add cards from their hand, and then you have an opportunity to add cards from your hand to the battle. So, players will have crown cards in their hand, or may have crown cards in their hand, because at the end of a player's turn, you draw 2 crown cards into your hand, and then you have to discard 1 crown card. Now, it doesn't have to be one of the ones you just drew, as long as you had other crown cards in your hand. At the end of your turn, you must discard 1 crown card. But because of that, after a few rounds, players will have some crown cards in their hand. So if we go back to our example here, where Stafford and Talbot are attacking Fitzallen and Clifford. So before, after the odds are determined, 190 against 140, then the defending player first has the opportunity to add a crown card. So maybe they have these crown cards in their hand. Now, they can't add a noble to the battle, but he does have in his hand a title card, the Earl of Wessex. Well, Fitzallen can't have a title because he already has one, but Clifford doesn't have a title. So he can award this card to Clifford, which gives him 20 extra troops. But that's all he can do because, as I said, he can't add a noble to the battle. So now that makes it 160 against 190. So that makes the odds even worse for Talbot and Stafford to win. But they then have an opportunity to add cards from their hand. So maybe he has this Swiss Landsnecks or whatever that says in them. So maybe he awards that to Stafford, and now he has 220 troops. And it can go back around. Then, if he was able to add another, he could say, okay, well, now I'm going to add this if he had it. And it keeps going around the table until all players have passed. So, Duke of Buckingham, the Talbot player could say, well, I'm also going to add, this town card and give me another 10 troops. And, but of course, you have to stick to the rules. Each noble can only have 1 title, and only a titled noble can have an office and can only have 1 office. So you have to stick to those rules when you're adding cards. Then you recalculate, with your new troop numbers and see what your new odds are, and then draw the event card and see if the odds are on that event card and see if you won the combat or not. And it works the same with sieges. I didn't cover that earlier when I was talking about sieges, but if you're sieging an enemy occupied fortification, before you draw your event card to see if you won, starting with the defender, they do have an opportunity to add cards from their hand, and then the attacker then has an opportunity to add cards from their hand, and so forth. And then if the attacker still has more equal to or more troops than the defender, then they can go ahead and draw the event card to see if they won the siege. And one other thing to mention, if you're fighting noble against noble in open field, just like with the siege attack, if the event card you draw says bad weather delays attack, then it's just like the battle doesn't take place, and there's nobody wins, nobody loses, and you just continue on. All right, so let's talk about noble deaths now. So if a noble dies from plague or from being named on a event card as killed location, as a killed noble during a combat resolution, then they are just killed, and you discard their noble card back into the crown card discard pile. If they had an office or a title, they go face up into the chancery. If they had a city card, it goes over here into the city card pile. If they have a town card or any other crown cards, those will just go into the crown card discard pile. Locations that they controlled become neutral. If they happen to have a major battle or major siege card, it goes back here. Oh, I didn't mention in the battle, when you're battling noble on noble like this, if at least one noble on both sides of the battle was an office holder, then if you win the battle, you get this major battle card. You have to award it to one of the nobles that participated in that battle, and it gives 2 prestige points. But if that noble is killed for any reason, then it goes back into the deck here. But the person that lost the noble, or the faction that lost the noble, isn't completely without some recompense. So for any cards they lost that went into the crown card discard pile or into the chancery, for every 2 cards that they lost that way, they get to draw 1 card into their hand from the crown card pile or the crown card deck. And that's called Rally to the Cause. All right, now, as I mentioned, if a faction attacks another faction, ends up winning the combat, then they capture the nobles that weren't killed. If any of the nobles were killed by the event card, then they're just killed and not captured. But any that were captured, the faction winning the battle can, make some deal with those nobles to ransom them, sending them back to their faction, maybe future promises or maybe some cards from their hand. You can give any cards from your hand to another player, but you cannot give nobles that are in play or offices that are in play or titles that are in play to another player in exchange for ransom of your nobles that have been lost in a battle. Now you can, say, well, I'll give you, from my nobles that were involved in the battle, I'll give you maybe this archbishop and, these, this town or whatever. Give them something like that, and make some other future promises or whatever negotiations you want to make that are legal to try to save your nobles. But if the attacking player that captured your nobles wants no part of that, they can just execute your nobles. And then just like your nobles dying from plague or event card, then your nobles go into the discard pile, your offices and titles go into the chancery. The player who executed you can keep any of your archbishops or and towns and cities, that sort of thing. But they have to assign them to their nobles that participated in that battle in a legal manner. And if your nobles are executed and you lose cards, then you still get the Rally to the Cause. So any of your cards that went to the Chancery or cards that you lost other than cards on this row, like, cities or major battles, then you can get the Rally to the Cause, where you get to draw 1 crown card for every 2 that you lost. One other thing I should mention about battles, either sieges or battles in the open field. If one side does have a royal piece with them, one of the royal pieces seen here, they can at any time before the combat, usually in the part of the combat where you're deciding whether you want to add cards from your hand, they can go ahead and just kill the royal piece. If they think they're going to lose the battle, they can kill the royal piece, as long as they do that before the event card is drawn to determine the outcome of the battle. again, siege or battle. They can kill a royal piece that they have with them to prevent their opponent from gaining that royal piece. So that is how you can gain royal pieces. You would, move into, all these royal pieces are currently in neutral um, fortified location. Well, that's not a royal piece, but they're all in neutral fortified locations. The royal piece doesn't have any army themselves other than the garrison in the town or city or castle that they're in. So you gain a royal piece by sieging one of these locations, and if you're successful, then you gain the royal piece. And at any time you can execute that royal piece if you want to, or you keep it with one of the nobles that participated in the capture of that royal piece. And if you ever combat an opposing noble that is carrying a royal piece and they don't execute them and you win the combat, then you gain control of that royal piece. So let's talk a little bit more about the royal pieces. So as I mentioned, you can win one from combat. You can win one if you siege a fortified location, successfully siege a fortified location where there is a royal piece. Or, for instance, like over here, the George, the Duke of Clarence and Cardigan has the white flag. That means it's an open town. So as long as there's not another noble in there, if you move one of your nobles in there, then you just take control of George, Duke of Clarence. So, for instance, we'll just say if these two guys were here and they, on their turn, they moved in here and went into Cardigan because there's no enemy nobles, then George, Duke of Clarence would have to be assigned to one of these nobles, either Stafford or Talbot. And so, just for this example, we'll say we decide to assign him to Talbot. So you can put a piece under it or on top of it, however you want to do. But then you find the card for that royal piece. So this one is the House of York, George, Duke of Clarence. So we'd come over here to our Yorkist cards and find the one for George. Well, that's not the right one. Where is he? That's Richard, Duke of York. Here he is, George, Duke of Clarence. So since we assigned him to Talbot, we would then slide this card under there in Talbot's faction, showing that he has control of Talbot. Now, at any time, nobles are in the same location, either in the same fortified location or in the same open field, you can give control of that noble to another noble in that location, and you would just give them the noble piece and slide the give them the card. Now, having the card, you'll see it gives you some prestige points. If it's an uncrowned royal piece, which George, Duke of Clarence is, that would give you 2 prestige points. So you would move your prestige point marker up. Another thing to note is a faction can't have control of a royal piece from 2 different houses for more than 1 turn. So right now we have George, Duke of Clarence from the Yorkist house. If we ended up also capturing a Lancastrian piece, like maybe later we moved over here and sieged Kenilworth and captured Margaret of Anjou, we could only have a piece from 2 different royal houses for 1 turn. So by the end of the next turn after we captured her, and the end of our next turn after we captured her, we would have to eliminated, killed off, or passed one of those to a faction that doesn't belong to us. So anyway, that is a rule. You can't have a royal piece from 2 different houses for more than 1 turn after you capture that second royal piece. So now that we've talked about how you gain a royal piece, you're probably wondering, well, why do I need those? So that's probably a good time to talk about how you can win the game. So let's get these victory cards up here and take a look. So one of the ways to win is the royal victory. So it says, at any time, show that your faction or alliance has the last surviving royal piece as king. Your faction or alliance wins the royal victory immediately. So, currently Henry VI is king. So if somebody controlled him and all the other royal pieces were killed either through plague or being captured and killed off, whoever is the last, if there's only one royal piece and they are crowned king, then the player or alliance that controls them will win the game. Now, at one time, there can only ever be one royal piece crowned king from each house. So there could be, Henry the Sixth is crowned king of the House of Lancaster, but somebody could crown one of the Yorkist pieces as king too, though the highest level member of that house in succession order has to be the one that's crowned king. So, for example, if we look here, as long as Richard, Duke of York, is still alive for the House of York, none of these other pieces could be crowned king. But if he's eliminated, the next in order, the order is shown here. So the next in order that could be crowned king is Edward, Earl of March. If he was eliminated, then George, Duke of Clarence, could possibly be crowned king. And finally, if he's eliminated, then the last remaining member, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, could be crowned king. And we'll look at the Lancastrians. As long as Henry VI is alive, he's the king. But if he's eliminated, the next in order is Margaret of Anjou. Then she could be crowned queen, I guess. And then finally, if Margaret was killed, then Edward of Westminster could be crowned king. So it is possible to have two pieces crowned as king at the same time, one from the Yorkist house and one from the Lancastrian house, but you couldn't have two Yorkists or two Lancastrians crowned as king at the same time. So anyway, again, to win the royal victory, you have to have a royal piece that's crowned as king, and that has to be the last surviving royal piece. Now you may be wondering, well, how do I crown a piece as king? Well, we'll get to that. The next phase after the combat phase is Parliament, so we'll talk about that a little bit. But then after the Parliament phase is the coronation phase, where you have the opportunity to crown a royal piece as king. So we'll talk about that when we get to the coronation phase. Well, let's talk about the other possible way to win, and that's the prestige victory. So in a three-player game, you can win a prestige victory after, you remember we put a prestige victory tile in the middle of the event deck. So once you've gone through half the event deck and that tile has been revealed, you just set it aside. But after that's been revealed, then it is possible to win a prestige victory. So you'll see you can win a prestige victory with 3 players. If you have 13, if you're a single, non-allied faction and you have 13 prestige points, then after the prestige victory tile's been revealed, if your faction has a king, so you have to have a crowned royal piece, and the required number of prestige, which for a single faction is 13 prestige points, then at the end of your turn, you can claim this card and you'd win the game. Now, if you're in an alliance, which we haven't talked about alliances yet, but we will get to that. If you're in an alliance of 2 factions, then you would need 18 prestige points and a crowned royal piece. One of the members of the alliance must control a crowned king, not a sole crowned king, but just one crowned king. And if you have 18 prestige points, then at the end of your turn you could take this and the allied factions would share the victory. All right, so that's and again, this for 3 players, so depending on the number of players, the prestige points required is different. So for 2 players, there wouldn't be an alliance with only 2 players. So if your faction has a king and 15 prestige points, at the end of your turn you can claim this card. And then it's different number of points for 4 and 5 players as well. If you have the sole crowned king, like Henry VI is at the beginning of the game, he's worth 4. If you have control of him, he is worth 4 prestige points. Now, if another king from the Yorkist faction is crowned, so he's only one of 2 kings, then he's only worth 3 prestige points. And kind of like I showed earlier, if you just had captured Margaret Anjou and she's not crowned, then she's worth 2 prestige points. But if she's crowned the sole monarch, queen regent, then she's worth 4 prestige points. But if she's one of 2, then she's only worth 3 prestige points, the same as Henry was. Alright, so we've talked about the event phase, the movement phase, the combat phase, talked about royal pieces and how you win the game. So as I said, after the combat phase in a player's turn, the next is parliament phase. That doesn't happen very often, but it can come up, so let's talk about the parliament phase. Alright, let's talk about the parliament phase. So if on your turn you have the sole king and there is a clamor for parliament card here on the clamor for parliament space, at least one, then on your turn you may summon parliament. If you're not the sole king, if there is either no king or if there's 2 kings, then the player that is the Chancellor of England on their turn can summon parliament. But they can only do that if, again, if there's a clamor for parliament card that's on this space, so it's been revealed during the event phase and placed here. And the Chancellor of England must also have one of these Chancellor may summon parliament event cards. Remember, we saw one of those drawn earlier. When it's drawn, you give it to the Chancellor of England. And then once they play this to summon parliament, they discard it. So for the Chancellor to do it, there has to be either no royal peace crowned king or 2 kings, so one from the Lancastrian house and one from the Yorkist house. If there's 2 kings, then the kings can't summon parliament, but the Chancellor of England can. But if there's a sole crowned king, then they're the one that can summon parliament on their turn. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so another criteria for calling parliament is that the person, either the king or the chancellor, whichever one is the one calling parliament, must be in either an unfortified town, so one of these, or a friendly town or city. So for example here, we'll say that Howard here had earlier taken London and captured Henry VI, who is the sole crowned king. So London is friendly to this faction, so they can call parliament there. So again, it's got to be either an unfortified town or a fortified town that's friendly to the faction that's controlling the person calling the parliament. Now it can't be Calais, and it also can't be a besieged fortified location. But other than that, as long as it's an unfortified town or a friendly town or city to the person that is calling parliament, and not Calais. So in our example, we'll say that's London, and that is where the parliament will take place. Then the person calling parliament must summon a noble from an unallied faction to attend parliament, and that noble can't be on one of the islands or at sea or at Calais. So you can't summon a noble to attend that's, on the Isle of Man or Anglesey or Isle of Wight or anywhere on a ship at sea or on Calais. And it has to be, again, a noble that is unallied to you and not part of your faction. So if Howard here was calling Parliament, so we'll say maybe he summons, this is Courtenay, so maybe he summons Courtenay. So he will come, because he's not friendly to London, he'll have to stay out in the open field, but he is attending Parliament. Then starting with the player who summoned Parliament, they can have any of their other nobles that they want to attend come to the location where the Parliament is taking place, again with the same restrictions if they're on one of the islands or at sea or at Calais or in a besieged location, they can't attend. But, so maybe we would have the Talbot faction here would have Berkeley come and attend the Parliament as well. And then the other factions can have any nobles that they want come and attend. But since they're not, if they're not allied, they would of course have to stay out in the open field. But in our example, we'll say nobody else wants to come and attend Parliament. So we just have the two, Berkeley and Howard, and then we've got Courtenay here from his faction. All right, then the player who summoned Parliament, once all the attendees have come, takes the cards in the Chancery. Now I added a couple others in here just for example, because normally you wouldn't summon Parliament until there were more than just the two cards that were in there at the beginning of the game. Because remember, anytime a noble is killed or eliminated, any of their offices or titles go to the Chancery. So there were just two in there, but I added a couple other ones for example. So the person that summoned Parliament will then take the cards in the Chancery and shuffle them up, and then they will draw a number of those cards equal to the number of nobles that attended the Parliament. So in this case, we just have 3 nobles that attended the Parliament. So even though there's 4 cards after I shuffle it, I'll only draw 3, since we only had 3 attendees to Parliament. The player that summoned the Parliament, then after he shuffled the cards that he drew, reveals them, and then he assigns them as he sees fit. He has to assign all of them. So he can assign them to, if he's got a spot for them in his nobles, and they can be assigned to nobles that even didn't attend the Parliament. So you don't have to only assign them to nobles that attended the Parliament. You don't have to assign them to only your nobles. You can assign them to any nobles. But likely, if your nobles can take them, like if you had some nobles that could possibly have an office but don't have one, you would want to assign it to your nobles. Now, as I said, you can assign them to any nobles, even those that didn't attend Parliament, but you can't assign them to any nobles that are at sea or that are under siege. But for example, our Talbot faction here revealed these. So looking at his nobles, this one already has a title and an office. This one already has a title and an office. This one has a title but no office. So maybe he wants to assign, Lord of the Isle of Wight to Berkeley. And Howard doesn't have a title or an office, so he could assign, Earl of Pembroke to Howard, and then because he gave him a title, he could also give him this office. And so none of the other nobles would get any offices. But if there were, more cards were drawn because more people attended Parliament, then he would now not have any nobles that he could award titles or offices to. So if there were other titles and offices left over, he would have to award them to any other nobles, to other nobles that could take them, even though they don't belong to his own faction. You have to award all the cards that you drew if possible. Now, if it's not possible, then you just put them back in the crown card discard pile. And to make sure there's not any ruckus, the King's Peace token is placed in the area where the Parliament was summoned, so no combat of any kind was allowed in that area until the end of the next turn from the player who summoned Parliament. So, Talbot's faction here, the Grey faction, summoned Parliament, so until the end of their next turn, there can be no combat that takes place in this area. Once you place the King's Peace token, you go ahead and turn the Clamor for Parliament card sideways and leave it there until the King's Peace token is picked up at the end of the player who summons Parliament at the end of their next turn. When the Peace token is removed, then you go ahead and take the Clamor for Parliament card and discard it. And then another Parliament cannot be summoned until there is another Clamor for Parliament card there, and of course after the one that was there is discarded. Now sometimes you may have more than one Clamor for Parliament card placed there, so in the following round after the Peace token is picked up, then it's possible if you had another Clamor for Parliament card there for someone to summon Parliament again. Alright, so that covers the Parliament phase. Alright, so after the coronation, or after the Parliament phase, we come to the coronation phase. Again, this is not going to take place too many times in a game, but when it does take place, it's to crown the senior surviving royal peace from each house. So, as I mentioned earlier, as long as Henry VI is alive, then the next person in succession order, which is Margaret of Anjou, cannot be crowned Queen Regent as long as Henry VI is alive. Now, Richard, Duke of York, can be crowned king because he's from House York, but somebody down the line from him could not be crowned king as long as Richard is still alive. So you can have 0 kings in play, you can have 1 king in play like we do have at the beginning of the game, or you can have up to 2 kings in play, one from House Lancaster and one from House York. But to crown somebody king, so for example, if we still had Henry VI alive, but somebody had captured Richard, Duke of York, and they wanted to crown him king, and you would have to meet the following criteria. So, for example, we'll say that Pole here had captured Richard, Duke of York at some point, and now he wants to crown him king. It's that faction's turn. It's their coronation phase. They want to crown Richard king. First, you have to be with 1 or more nobles friendly to your faction. So in this case, he is with Pole. The Poles are Beaufort faction's turn. Pole is part of Beaufort's faction, so he's friendly to this player. You have to have at least an archbishop or collectively 2 bishops. Now, since each noble can only have 1 bishop or archbishop, if you don't have an archbishop, then you would have to have at least 2 friendly nobles there, each with a bishop. Now, in our case, we've set it up so that Pole does have the archbishop, so we don't need 2 nobles there, each with a bishop. We do have a friendly noble that has the royal peace we want to crown, and we have an archbishop with Pole. You also have to occupy an area that has a cathedral, so you'll know if there's a cathedral, if there's one of these little white crosses with the circle around it. If that is a fortified location, like this city is, then that city or fortified location has to be friendly to you. So this one, you'll see we have a faction marker for Beaufort's faction, so it is friendly to pole here. But you could do it in one of these other locations that's not a fortified location, so then it doesn't have to be, there wouldn't be any control marker there because those types of locations can't be controlled. But again, if it's a fortified location, it does have to be friendly to your faction in order to use it for the coronation phase. If you've met those conditions, then you just announce that you're crowning this royal piece king or queen. If it's Margaret of Anjou, you turn it over to its crowned side. And then you would also turn over the corresponding card. So Richard, Duke of York, you would turn it over to its crowned side. It shows the crown there. And then it would go from being worth 2 prestige points to being worth 3 if Edward, or there is still a crowned king on the Lancastrian side, but if he was the sole crowned king, then it would be worth 4 prestige points at this point. And that's it. You've crowned your royal piece king, and that would end the coronation phase. Finally, we move on to the end of turn phase. Alright, the first thing in the end of turn phase is if the prestige victory card has been revealed and you or your alliance controls one of the crowned kings and has the correct number of prestige points, then at that point you can claim victory and win the game. Alright, if you can't win a prestige victory, then the next thing you do is draw 2 crown cards from the crown deck into your hand. If the crown deck is empty and there's cards in the discard pile, you go ahead and shuffle the crown deck so that you can draw your 2 cards. Those go into your hand. And you will, before the end of your end of turn phase, you will need to discard 1 crown card from your hand. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be one of the 2 you just drew. If you have other cards in your hand, it can be one of the other cards in your hand. But before you discard one, you can do some other things like politicking. And during the politicking, you can discuss with other players, trade crown cards in hand with other players. Now you can trade crown cards in hand with any players. You don't have to be in the same area as them. Your nobles don't have to be in the same area. You can just discuss with other players and trade cards from your hand. Again, even office and title cards and stuff, as long as they're in hand, you can trade them. Also during this time, if you've got nobles in the same area, they can swap cards between them. Eligible cards, you can't swap titles or offices, but you could swap, cities, towns, mercenaries, that kind of thing. Bishops, archbishops. If you've got nobles in fortified locations, at this time you can move them from inside the fortification into the open field in their area. If you're worried about a plague card coming up in one of the events that may come up in the other players' turns before it's your turn again, and you can move them out. So that's just a matter of, do you want to take a chance of staying in a fortified location that may have a plague card come up or not. But again, during the end of turn phase, if you do have your nobles in fortified locations, you can move them out into the open field in the same area. And also at this time, you can declare alliances or end alliances or execute royal pieces if you have them, and so forth. And then finally, when all of that's done, you must discard 1 card from your hand, 1 crown card from your hand. All right, just some other things to mention now. You can play cards in your hand, such as if you have noble cards in your hand, you can play those cards into your play area and add, titles or offices to those nobles, or whatever. You can add cards to those nobles, and you can do that at any time. So if you drew 2 crown cards and one of them's a noble and one of them's a title, you can at that time go ahead and play that noble into your area and add that title to them. Um, or you can do that even on another player's turn. So at any time, you can play cards from your hand, into your faction play area, except for when you're drawing an event to resolve, a combat or a siege or something like that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, during combat, you can't play nobles in the middle of combat. You can't play nobles into your play area and say that they're joining the battle. At the very beginning of the game, alliances cannot be formed, but as soon as the head of either household, so not necessarily a king, but the head of the household. So at the beginning of the game, either Richard, Duke of York, or Henry VI, they are both the head of the two households at that time. As soon as one of the heads of the household is claimed by a faction, then after that point going forward, alliances can be formed. So, but it doesn't necessarily have to be one of these two. If Henry is killed by a plague right off the bat, and Margaret of Anjou is then head of the household, as soon as somebody claimed her, then alliances could be formed. So anyway, as soon as one of the heads of the household is claimed, then players can start forming alliances if they wish. So maybe at the beginning of the game, players will put these alliance markers here on the alliances track. You can wait until an alliance is formed to do that as well. But for instance, if at any time, once you're able to form alliances, players can announce they've formed an alliance. So perhaps Beaufort here and Courtenay here decide they're going to form an alliance. So to show they're in an alliance, you would put their two faction markers together in a box showing that they're allies. If if you had a 4-player game and 3 people became allies, you would put, the 3 markers in the box. So you just put them in an allies box showing that those people are now allies. So the first thing that happens when an alliance is formed, if amongst those allies they have royal pieces, they control royal pieces from the 2 different houses, then they have to immediately execute all the royal pieces that they have from one of the houses. So if Beaufort's faction had Richard, Duke of York, and maybe Courtenay's faction up here had Margaret of Anjou, then as soon as they form their alliance, they have to execute one of those royal pieces. They can't have royal pieces from opposing houses as soon as the alliance is formed. They then take an alliance marker, so if they're going to, keep Yorkist royal piece, then they take a Yorkist alliance marker. If they're going to have Lancastrian royal pieces, then they take a Lancastrian alliance marker, and they combine their total prestige points and replace their prestige marker with the alliance prestige marker, combining the total of all the prestige that they had individually. So, in this case, they've each got 2, so they would remove their pieces and their alliance would have 4 prestige points. All nobles in the alliance can freely pass through and enter other nobles in their alliances, fortifications and castles and so forth. They can move into them, they can pass through them. Nobles in an alliance can never attack each other. That kind of goes without saying. That would end the alliance, but you can't end the alliance that way. You just can't attack any noble that you're allied with. Allied nobles can attack and defend together, so you could have, 2, if like we talked about, if Beaufort's faction and Courtenay's faction are together, they could both be in a fortified location and defend it together, or they could move and attack an enemy's nobles or fortification together, just as if they were of the same faction. All right, if nobles are going to move and attack together, they have to form what's called an allied force, and so they have to determine who is going to be the commander of that force. So between the allies, they decide, okay, this allied force is going to be commanded by this player this turn, and that commander can move, that allied force on his turn and attack with that allied force on his turn. But then when it's the other faction player's turn, he can't then move and attack with those same nobles. So it still remains that a noble can only move or attack, one time per round. But it just, if you form an allied force and appoint somebody a commander, then that commander, even though it's not your faction's pieces, they can move that force together with their pieces and attack with that force. But that only lasts one round, and then if that force is going to remain together, then they have to announce again and announce who the commander is. And then you can only leave an alliance in your end of turn phase. So if you decide in your end of turn phase that you want to leave an alliance, then you announce that, and you would move your marker out from the box saying you're no longer in an alliance, reset your prestige points to your individual prestige points. So the alliances can be formed pretty much at any time, but you can only end the alliance or your participation in an alliance on your end of turn phase. All right, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, I'm sure there's some little nuances that I've left out here. This video is already pretty long, and I still need to do some example turns, so I didn't cover every little facet of this. But I think I went over most of the rules. If you want to watch a kind of a rules overview videos, or a series of rules overview videos that are, I think, superior to this in going over the rules of Kingmaker, I would check out Ricky Royal's videos. I think he's got a 4-part series guide to kingmaking that goes over this game, and it's pretty good. I definitely think he did a better explanation of going over the rules than I did. But just thought I would mention that. His YouTube channel is Box of Delights, so if you want to check that one out, I would recommend it. But anyway, now I'm going to move on to some example turns. Alright, hopefully I have everything set back up how it was right after setup. And we'll begin some example turns. Remember, our start player is the Talbot faction over here. So let's see what they want to do. First, we have the event phase, so they have to draw an event card. So we'll do that. We look at the top portion here. Peasant Revolt, Earl of Essex to Colchester. Well, I don't think we have an Earl of Essex out. Let me just scan the cards real quick and make sure we don't. No, it doesn't look like we do. De Vere to Hedingham. I don't think we have a De Vere. Let me look real quick. Nope, no De Vere. And Marshal of England to Malden. And we don't have a Marshal of England either. So this event card isn't really going to affect us, so we'll just put it in the discard pile. Alright, so now they go to their movement phase. So maybe Talbot and his faction want to go try to capture Edward, Earl of March, who's over here in Harlech, which is a royal castle with a garrison of 200. I don't think they're going to have enough quite with that. I think we decided they have, what, 190, 100, 80, 90, yeah. So they won't quite have enough to capture him right off the bat. But maybe that's the way they want to head. So All right, so they will use regional movement, so he can move from this region to anywhere in this region. He'll be in the open field. Stafford will do the same. And then old Berkeley here, he can't quite reach there, but he can go to Wales here. Wales, not Wales, Wales. And he will stop there. And we'll leave, guess we'll leave Howard here in Farnham for right now. All right, that's going to end our movement phase. That's all the movement we're going to do. So there's no combat phase. We're not anywhere where there's going to be combat. There's no parliament phase. There's no coronation phase. So now we go to the end of turn phase, and we'll draw 2 crown cards and see what we got. We got Town of Coventry and Company of Lands Knights. Well, that could change our plans, because if we play Coventry, that would give us control of Coventry, which is where Edward of Westminster is, and we could just walk right in there. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and play both these cards that we got. We'll give the Swiss Landsnecks, or whatever, however you pronounce that, to Stafford, and we'll give the Town of Coventry to Talbot, and we'll put one of our control markers on Coventry. Which is where Edward is, and that's going to end our turn. Now I will mention, if another noble had already conquered Coventry and had control of it when we drew that card, we would just have to give that card to them. It wouldn't pass control to us, but because it was neutral, then since we drew the card, we can play it and take control of that town. All right, well, now play passes over to the Beaufort faction. So the first thing they will have to do is draw an event card. We'll see what they got. Piracy, Stanley to Preston. I don't think we have any nobles named Stanley, so we don't have to do that. So nothing to do there. There's no Stanley out. All right, and now it's the Beaufort faction's movement phase. Well, since George, Duke of Clarence, is in an open town there, we can have Herbert just go on in there. He's going to move in there into that open town with regional movement, so then he can immediately control George, Duke of Clarence. So let's get his card. Okay, so I've got George. He's going to grant 2 prestige to the Beaufort faction, so we will give them 2 prestige. They'll be at 4, and then the noble Herbert is who moved in there, so he'll be controlling George. Well, since Herbert's pretty weak, he's only got a strength of 30 troops. We better move some folks in there to help him out, so we'll send Hastings that way. So with regional movement, he's in this region. He can go to Wales also. So he could, in the combat phase, if he wanted to, he could attack Berkeley, who has 40 troops, but Hastings only has 50 troops. That probably wouldn't work out too well. So I doubt he's going to want to combat him. And then let's see, maybe we'll move Beaufort himself. He'll move up that way. Here, he'll be in the open field. And I think for right now, we'll leave Pole, Duke of Suffolk, over here where he is. All right, that's going to end our movement phase. So then we go on to the combat phase. As I said, we could have a combat here, but I don't think we want to do that. It's unlikely we would be successful. Parliament phase, we're not going to have that. There's no clamor for Parliament or anything like that. Oh, we couldn't attack him anyway. I forgot, because it's the first round of the game, and there's no attacking in the first round of the game. So he couldn't attack him even if he wanted to. There's no attacking other nobles in the first round of the game. You could siege neutral fortifications, but no attacking other nobles in the first round. Alright, so he couldn't attack him anyway. Alright, and then so no parliament phase, no coronation phase, so now he'll just draw 2 crown cards. Let's see what he got. An Archbishop of Canterbury and a town of Nottingham. Now he could keep these in his hand if he wanted to play later, but oh, you know what? I messed up at the end of the last guy's turn because he has to be able to discard a card, and he didn't do that. So I would have had to discard one of these cards. So I'm going to keep Coventry, but he will discard these lands next. And then this guy, boy, I guess he'll discard Nottingham, and he's going to keep this Archbishop of Canterbury, and he'll give that to Duke of Suffolk, and that's going to give him prestige point. So we'll move that up there. And because we got the Archbishop of Canterbury, we take control of Canterbury, so we need to put one of our faction control markers there. It's in 6B. So that is right here. Alright, and that is going to end that faction's turn. Alright, and now we move on to the Courtenay faction, and we'll see what they want to do. First they got to draw an event card. And they got a Scots raid, so Warden of the Northern Marches to Bamburgh or Bambur, however they say it. We do have a Warden of the Northern Marches. That's the Talbot Earl of Shrewsbury. So he has to go up to 4G. Where was he? I think I moved him here. So that kind of foils my plans there. So he's got to go all the way up here. Now he can't go in there because it's control. Oh, well, that is his marker, so he can go in there. Alright, so now we need to see what the Courtenay faction might want to do. They're the brownish colored guys. Well, I think they're just going to start heading toward the center of the board and maybe they'll want to try to catch one of these guys. I don't think we can get Richard since he's in a city, and that gives a garrison of 300. It'll be a while before we could get him, but we'll just say they're all going to kind of move that way. So Courtenay himself, he'll do regional movement, so he can move into this region, maybe here into Abingdon. Let's see. I guess that guy's got Lincoln. So this is Cromwell. We'll have him move. He's going to move over here in this area. And we'll have Clifford. He's going to do regional movement. He'll move down here by Nottingham. And we'll have Fitzallen just stay there for right now. Alright, that's the end of their movement phase. No combat. Again, we're not in any position to do any combat, and even if we could, we can't combat enemy nobles in the first round. So no parliament, no coronation phase. So now he'll draw 2 cards. Oh, I forgot to discard this event card. Let's see what he got. Oh, he got 2 titles. Earl of Richmond and Duke of Exeter. He could give one to Clifford there. This guy's already got a title. These guys have 2 titles. So I think Earl of Richmond. He could hold it. He could play it later at any time, but I think we want to go ahead and play it now. So he's going to give Clifford the Earl of Richmond, which gives him 40 extra troops. And then we will discard Duke of Exeter. Alright, that's his end of turn phase. So that now ends the round. And So now starting this second round on, there can be combat between the nobles. Alright, so we are back to the Talbot faction. They need to draw an event card. See what they got. Oh, a clamor for Parliament, so we'll put that there. So if down the road somebody meets the criteria to call a Parliament by controlling the sole king, or if there's no king or two kings, the Chancellor could call Parliament, but the Chancellor would need one of those event cards that allows him to call Parliament. So anyway, nobody will probably be able to call Parliament this round, and not much of a reason to, with only... we should have another card in the Chancery there. I guess I didn't set that back up right. Hold on, let me put another one in there. I remember we had an office in there after setup. I don't remember which one. I just grabbed an office out of the crown deck and set it there. But anyway. Alright, so we did our event phase for Talbot's faction, and now it's their movement phase. Alright, well, we'll go ahead and move Berkeley in here with Stafford. And how many troops does that give us? 40 plus Stafford's in there with 100, 140. This Royal Castle has 200, so we definitely don't have enough. We meant to have enough, but Talbot got sent up there, so we'll start moving him back. So he's going to do regional movement, and he'll move into this region here. He's got to be in the open field. And who else do we have? We still have Berkeley down here, but he doesn't have much. He's only got 40 troops, so we'll just leave him there. I think that's going to end our movement phase. So now we go on to our combat phase. We don't have enough to try to siege Harlech here. We don't have enough troops, and we don't have anywhere else to do combat. There's not going to be a Parliament phase, and there's not going to be a coronation phase. So now we go to the end of turn phase. And I think the only thing to do there is draw our 2 crown cards. Now we got a new noble, and we got a ship. Alright, well, I don't think I'd want a ship right now. We got this noble, but we won't play him. We could play him right now and put him in play, but I think we're going to keep him in our hand. So we'll just keep that card in our hand. All right. We're going to go on to the Beaufort faction's turn. So, of course, first thing they have to do is draw an event card. Uh-oh, we got Plague in Northampton and in Oxford. So 4C, Northampton, that is here. There's nobody in there, so they're not going to die. And Oxford is 4B. And that's owned, but nobody there. So we don't have nobody's killed. And if they can remember, Northampton and Oxford is safe from plague in the future. Alright, so it's the Beaufort faction's movement phase. They've got Duke of Clarence up here in Cardigan, but that's an open town. They can't control that. So maybe they want to move the Duke, Old George, to somewhere a little safer. So we'll say they move down here to Swansea, which they control as a fortified location. Oops, he's not king. And we'll say that Hastings here is going to go there as well to kind of help out. Yeah, he'll go in the fortified location as well. Beaufort could move along the road here, but he would have to ask Courtenay if he can pass through. So he's going to try that. He says, "Hey, can I pass through?" Courtenay says, "Yeah, you can pass through as long as next time I need to pass through one of your fortified locations, you agree to that." So he says okay. I mean, he's not stuck to doing it, but he says okay. And of course, he owns this one. And he's going to move over here in the field near London. And Pole's going to do the same thing. He's going to take the road and come down here to London. All right, I think that's about going to be it. There's not going to be a combat. There's not going to be a parliament or a coronation, so we'll go on to the end of turn phase. You know, there could be some politicking and whatnot going on. It's kind of hard to do that when you're playing single player. So we're just going to draw our 2 crown cards. We got Marshal of England. That's worth 100 troops. That might be a good one to save in our hand and play when somebody thinks they're going to attack me, and then all of a sudden you whoop out 100 extra troops. Of course, it has to go to a titled noble, so the only one, these guys already have offices and titles, so the only one he'd be able to do that on is Hastings, but I think he's going to keep that in his hand, and he'll discard this noble Ruse, who's only got 20 troops. All right, and that's going to end his turn. All right, moving on to Courtenay's faction. He draws an event card. Storms at sea. Any ships at sea have to take refuge in the nearest port. There's only a couple of ships on the map right now, and they're both at port, so that's not really going to affect anybody. I think Courtenay is going to do regional movement to move up here in this region where Coventry is. They can't move in there because it's controlled by the Talbot faction, but they're going to move in there. I think Fitzalan will move in there as well. I think Cromwell is going to move in there as well, and Clifford will move in there as well. So now we can replace this with a stacking marker. So we'll put those in that box and place a stacking marker here showing that all those guys are in there. And then I think we're going to siege Coventry. Now there's no noble in there, so it's just a town with a garrison of 200. And with all my troops there, I've got 100 with Courtenay, and then another 90, so 190 with Fitzalan, 200, 250, so well over the 200 needed. So I think we just need to draw an event card and see if we, as long as we don't get a bad weather delays attack, then we will be successful. Alright, we didn't get a bad weather delays attack. If we had Greystoke or Ruse in there, they would be killed, but we don't. So we are successful in our siege. So now we will we'll remove this control marker and place ours there. Alright, so now we own Coventry, and we have Edward of Westminster, so we need to get his card. Alright, and that will give us 2 prestige points. So that'll move us up to 4. And then Edward has to be controlled by one of those nobles. So we'll just give him to Fitzalan. Alright. Okay, well, we are back to the Talbot faction's turn. So they will draw an event card. They get a free move, so they'll just keep that. Now they have 2 of those. Nobody's used any of those yet. Alright, so on to their movement phase. We'll say Talbot here wants to take the road. He's going to take the road on down here. And he gets to here, and the Courtenay faction denies him access to get past his castle there, so he has to stop in the open field there. Alright, and then he decides to go ahead and move Berkeley, so he's going to move him by road all the way up this way. And let's see, Coventry does not block that, so he can take this road all the way. This is his own place here. So I guess he'll stop here in Shrewsbury. And his other two guys are just going to stay here in Harlech. They're waiting for some reinforcements so they can siege the castle of Harlech and capture that royal peace. They're the only faction right now without one. Now, nobody has the head of one of the houses or the king yet, but they've all got a royal, or the other two factions have a royal peace. But I think that's going to end our movement phase. We're not going to have a combat phase. We're not going to have a parliament phase. So we just go to our end of turn phase. This is where they could do some repositioning of their nobles. Like if he's worried that Shrewsbury's going to get hit by the plague, he could move him out. Or if he wanted to, try to trade, tell somebody he's got a noble, he can trade him for, some promise or some card in their hand or something. But he's not going to do any of that. That's just going to end his turn, and then he'll draw his two cards. So he got a title and a ship. I don't know, the ship will be way up there, so I think he's going to pass on the ship. That's the one he's going to discard. And I think he'll give this title to, he's going to go ahead and give this title to Howard right now because he could use the extra 30 troops when they try to siege Harlech there. So he's going to award that. Well, let me do that. He couldn't have awarded it to one of these other nobles because they already have a title. Berkeley's got Earl of Worcester. He's got Duke of Buckingham, and he's got Earl of Shrewsbury. So that's the only one he could have given that title to. Again, he could have kept it in his hand and used it later for a trade or, played it later at some time. But he decided to play it now. All right, back to Beaufort's faction. They have to draw an event card. We got a peasant revolt, so the Earl of Kent has to go to Rochester. We do have the Earl of Kent, that's Hastings. I think he is over here at Swansea. So he's going to have to go to Rochester, which is in 5B. Right here, this little unfortified town. So he'll be there, but that moved him over by his other people, so that may not be too bad. And then the Marshal of England has to go to Blackheath. We have a Marshal of England card, and you can see this one actually gets called a lot. Whoever has that, they can get called 10 times by event cards. But it hasn't been played on anybody yet, so they're not going to get called. So, it's good to have the 100 troops, but obviously you're going to get called away a lot being the Marshal of England. All right, so we discard that one. Alright, so it's the Beaufort faction's movement phase. Hastings is going to move in here to the London area here, along with these other guys. We'll go ahead and put a stacking marker so we know who we've got in there. Here's our stacking marker. And then we have this Marshal of England. So I think we're going to give that to Hastings. He does have a title, so he can have an office. That is going to give the Beaufort faction another prestige point, so that's going to move them up to 6. And now, with the 3 nobles they have there, and the help of Marshal of England giving Hastings 100 troops, we have over 300 troops, which is what's required to siege London. London is a city which has a garrison of 300. There's no other nobles there, so just having over 300 troops is all that's required to siege it. So that is what we're going to do. So we're at our there's no more movement, so we're going to do our combat phase. We're going to siege that. Only thing that can prevent us from being successful is bad weather, and we don't get that. Though, unfortunately, Hastings is killed, but we still are successful. So Beaufort's faction will control the king, Henry VI. So we have to give that to one of the, now Hastings is dead, so he can't take him. So we'll give him to the Duke of Somerset, Beaufort himself. And because he's the sole king, he's worth 4 prestige points. So they will go up another 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We do have to, unfortunately, kill off Hastings, so we put his noble card in the discard pile, his title and office will go into the chancery. And we also have to discard town of Northampton. So we got to remove our control markers from Northampton and Ashby, and let me make sure. And well, we didn't give ourselves Harlech, which we should have for the Marshal of England, but since we didn't, we don't have to remove our control markers there, but we do have to remove them from Ashby and Northampton. Alright, but we do get rallied to the cause for the cards we lost. We lost these 2, plus 2 that we put in the chancery, so 4, so we get 1 card for every 2 that we lost, so he does get to draw, the Beaufort faction does get to draw 2 cards into their hand. So they got a new noble, Duke of Norfolk, which they could put in play now, and a title, which wouldn't really do them any good right now because all their other nobles, well, no, Herbert doesn't have a title. Anyway, I think right now they'll just keep these in their hand. But now we do have an issue because we have the Lancastrian king, but we also control a Yorkist. So we would have to, by the end of our next turn, kill one of those off. I think we're going to go ahead and just kill George, Duke of Clarence right now. So we will discard his card and his token there. Oh, I forgot we got to remove Hastings' token. All right. We can just, with only 2 guys now, we can go ahead and put these guys back on the board. And we'll put them in London since they took that, and they can take the City of London card, which is going to give yet another prestige, and this has to be given to one of the people that were in the battle, so we'll give that to Duke of Suffolk Pole here. That's going to give another prestige, so we are up to 11. Alright, I think that's it. Now actually, we could have a Parliament phase if we wanted, because there is a clamor for Parliament card in play. This player does control the sole crowned king. He is in a friendly fortified city, which I guess we need to put a token there to show that that is friendly to us. So he could call a Parliament, but I think this video's already gone on too long, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Yeah, I think you have a good idea how the game plays. The only thing we didn't show here was, maybe a noble battle between 2 nobles in the field, but I showed that in my play overview, and we're at 2.5 hours now, so I don't know that people want to watch, keep watching a video that long, so I'm going to wrap it up. I will just make a comment that I actually had this game for like 1.5 years and hadn't played it. I wasn't sure I was going to like it. I had opened it and looked at the contents, and it just wasn't really grabbing me. So I'd put off learning it and playing it, but I think I'll really have a good time with this game if I can get, at least like 3 or 4 other people to play it with. I had fun just playing it single player by myself, so I think I'll really enjoy it when I can actually do some politicking and that kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to trying this in the future. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.